Hey, and welcome to this introduction to Excel. In this session, I'm going to look at naming cells. So we've seen before in calculations that we can reference to different cells. We can take B5 plus C5. So if they're 2 and 3, we add them to 5. And we saw an example of a fixed reference. We had the years, so we added some years here, like this, and we saw that Excel was smart enough that if we selected these, clicked on this box and pulled it out, that it increased the years by 1. And if we have a bank account with an interest rate of 5%, we in here, when we calculate the interest rate, we take 1, the original amount in our bank account. So what we previously had, C3 multiplied by 1, we still have that amount left, and then we add the interest rate, which is 5%. We get that. If we pull it out, we see that it didn't work. So instead, we had to make it a fixed reference. So we did that by pressing F4. So we did that when we looked at references, right? And now when we pull it out, we get the correct interest rates. We formatted these cells by removing the decimals to 0. But there's another way of dealing with names or with fixed references, and that is by giving them a name. So we can give the cell a name. Now, right now, when we refer to the cell, we just call it C6. But we can also name the cell. And the way to do that is, the easiest way to do that is to click up here in the name box. And here we can name it interest rate. So if we name it interest rate, and then it doesn't like that name. So we can't write whatever we want. So we can just write interest. That should be good enough. And we see that now we've named it our interest. We should have, we see if we click it. Oh, okay, we try again. Interest, enter. Yes, I didn't click enter. So we write in the name, and in this case interest, click enter, and now it's called interest. So if I click here, we see that it says H7 because it's a cell H7. But if I click here, it now says interest here in the name box. And if we click here, we see that it's called interest. Okay, so now if I refer to this, I can refer to it by its name. So if I click here, it says now interest instead. And I can also write that in. If I write in interest, I get that. And also if I start writing it int, we see I get various functions, but I can also write, and we get the actual reference here. We see if it's an fx, it's a function, but here it's a cell or several cells we're referring to. So in this case, one cell. Interest. And if I call it if I give it a name and refer to it as a name, it's also will treat it not as a fixed reference, not as a relative reference, but a fixed one, that I always want it to be interest. So we see here that even though I haven't locked this as in I haven't put any dollar signs, it will treat it as a fixed reference. So that is one of the benefits of names. Another one is, of course, that if we're just referring to a random cell, it might be hard to get an overview of what we're doing. If I instead give it a name, it can be much easier when we look at what does this do. Okay, it takes this, whatever it was in the previous, multiplied by 1 plus the interest. Okay, now I understand it. So that's the benefit of giving it a name. But we might, but there's some things to keep in mind. So one thing is, what if we have several things we want to name? So let's see, let's create some space. I can do this by selecting this, or I can select it with Control Shift arrow down and to the right, as we've seen before. And I click Control X to cut it, Control V to paste it, and I now have moved it. Another way of moving, here we saw move, just select it, Control X, Control V, move it around various ways, Control Z to undo. But another way of moving things, if I want to move it over a bit to the right, is I can, if I undo again, move it here to the right is I can click on this column and right click and press insert. That is, inserts another column in front of column C. So I get another one in between here that's empty. And if I do that, that column will now be called C and this one will be called D and so on. So it's the same as moving these over. So I'll try this here, insert, and now we see that it's the same as moving this over. You have to be a little bit careful because there might something happen further down. You weren't thinking about this also moves, but that's one way of moving things around. Again, if we want to adjust the size of the columns or the size of the rows, oftentimes it's the columns you want to adjust. You can do so by clicking here. So we wait till it's no longer an arrow down, but a line with 2 arrows on each side, and we can adjust the width. One way to adjust the width is to adjust it so that it's enough for whatever is in here. We see interest rate is too big for the cell. Now this cell right here is empty, so it bleeds into that cell. We see that this line disappears and it still is like it's one big cell. That doesn't mean that interest rate takes up 2 cells. This cell is still empty. If I click on it, we see there's nothing here. But if I click here, we see it says interest rate and that bleeds into here. If I write something here though, like a 4, now it's no longer an empty cell. It cannot bleed into, and we see that this stops here. We see interest. The rest isn't there. If I press F2, I see it, but if I just look at the output, I don't see it. So how can I adjust this so I can pull this out? But one way is just to double click. When I see this icon, instead of pulling this, I just double click on it. It will adjust automatically the cell's width so that everything is big enough. So it's big enough so I can see everything. Another way is to right click and go to column width and there adjust if you want as well. And that's good if we want a uniform, sort of the same width on every column. If we want everyone to be, for example, 6, then that's a good way of doing so without, here it's a bit of a, how long is the width and so on. And if you want to do it for several, we can choose several. How do I do this? I click here, I hold down Control and click on the other columns and then right click column width, and then because they have different widths, this is now empty. It doesn't show any width because it varies from column to column. If I write in 6, however, press OK, and I get the same width for all of them. Now, if I have, perhaps I might have several inputs. So I have the population. I might have growth rate of that population. I might have based on something, I might have sales. I might have price or something. I'm just making things up. We might have various things in our in an economic model that we want to take into account. So and this is input data. So we put in this is what we get from the real world, and then we make calculations on it. So the population, we put in, what is this? 10 million. And again, if we don't know if it's easy to see, we can click on this, right click format cells, or just click here quickly to make it into, okay, 10 million. So 10 million growth is, let's say it's 5. Let's make it 4%. Sales is 20,000 and the price is 500. I'm just making these numbers up, but something like this. And again, I can't read population completely. I can double click here to see that. Okay, that's nice. If we have something like this and we're going to refer to these in various points in our calculations in our sheet and perhaps different sheets, we might want to give these names. And so we write it like this, and you often see this. This is an intuitive way of writing it because the population amount, 10 million, how do we know this is the population? Because it says so right there. So how do we know this growth? It says right there. This is very intuitive. Even though these are different cells, we get it. But if we want to refer to these, we're obviously going to refer to this cell, and it's going to be called B2. We might want to call this cell population. So how do we do that? Well, we can transfer these names to these cells quite easily by going here into formulas. And here we have our sort of ways to deal with names. So we can now press this create from selection. So we've selected this data with names here and the actual cells that these names refer to here, right? So we've selected all of them. We click create from selection, and automatically Excel guesses which one we want, which is the left column. So create names from the values in the left column. So in the left column, that's this one. That's where we have the names. That's where we take our names from, and we're going to give those to the rest of here in the right column. So we click OK. We see what happens. Nothing seems to have happened, but if we click here, we see that this now has the name of population in the name box. Same here, growth, sales, price. But what if we realized something was wrong? We didn't want it to be, this wasn't price, this was the cost. So write cost instead. Now we have to change this. So we can change this, either create from selection, we just write cost in here, enter. Okay, so now it's called cost. So if we want to refer to this, click here, we can refer to this as cost. But we see here, if we write price, we are still referring to it. That name still exists. So just because we put in cost here and changed it, doesn't mean we've actually changed it. And we click on this triangle, we see that there's several names in this sheet. We see all the names in this sheet. And if we see that price is still here, we see that's still there. If we go to population, that's there. Interest is here. Cost is there. And sales there. But price is also that one. So now it has two names. And that's problematic, because what if we want to name something else price? So here we have price. And price was 700. So we say, okay, name this one price. Well, now if I just click that, it jumps to this one because it's the price cell. So I can't name this price. Okay, I try from selection. Create from selection, left column. Okay. And now I can do it. I can replace the existing definition of price. So that's one way of doing it. But perhaps the name itself, maybe it's a misclick or something. I don't want to replace. I just want it gone. How do I do that? How do I get rid of a name? Well, we do that here in formulas and go to name manager. Here we get an overview of all the names we've added, and we see them here, and we see what they are. In this case, we see that there are names of various cells, and here are the various names, and they also refers to where. And we see here, when we go to refers to, that it says the sheet, so sheet 1, exclamation mark, that's the sheet, and then the cell that it is. So here we find price, and we can now delete this. So we can press here delete, or we can press edit if we want to change it to cost. But we already have cost here, so we can just click delete. Are you sure you want to delete the name price? Yes, I do. Okay. What happened here? Well, here we were referring to price, and that still refers to price. But now that we've deleted the name price, it doesn't know what that is. So we get this. And what is this? What does this mean? Well, this is an error that just means what we're trying to display is too big to be displayed. So we're just displaying hashtags. Now, if I make this one smaller so we can't see, we get the same thing, right? Hashtags. Whilst if I do something with names smaller, we just get part of a name. So when we see text, it just cuts off the text. But when we have numbers, it doesn't want to cut off the numbers, because what if you cut off the numbers and it said, instead of 2020 and 1158, it just said 20 and 58. You might think, okay, that's 20 and 58. So instead, they just give it hashtags to say we can't show all the numbers. And same here with an error message to say you can't show the whole thing, they show us hashtags. So if we double click here, we'll expand it, and same way here, we can drag it out or double click, it will be big enough. And we see we get hashtag name question mark. This is an error message. The error messages in Excel, they start with hashtag and some sort of statement that what the error is. And if we click here, we get the little green, and we can click on the explanation mark, we get an explanation for it. The formula contains unrecognized text. So this name, what does that mean? It means there's a name here, it doesn't know what it is. And that's this name here, price, that it doesn't know what price is, because we've removed the reference that it was. That was B5 was called price. So you have to be careful when you delete names, so that they, if you're referring to those names, that will then become an error because they will no longer know what they're referring to. Also, again, with deletions like that, we cannot undo them. Again, here I'll go into name manager and delete this interest name, this one. That means we'll get error messages here. So I'll delete that. Are you sure you want to? Yes. Okay. Click close. This changes. Can I undo that? Actually, I can. Oh, interesting. You learn something new every day. We see that most deletions in Excel cannot be undone if it's deleting this kind of stuff. But in Name Manager, it actually can be undone, which is quite nice. But we see I press redo there, Control Y. We see we get the same things. We get the hashtag here where there is not enough room for the error message, but here that's the error message. We have the same ones here as well. So now we know how we can use names and some of the issues that can come up and how we fix them and how we are aware of them. So we can utilize names by creating from selection or adding them manually, and we can delete them or edit them in the Name Manager.